going to jump now to the news. We're going to jump to our group of reporters from Washington Informer. I'm looking forward. I think we're going to bring them up now, Shevry. We've got Kayla Benjamin, Will Ford, Jamila Bay. Hey, Jamila, how are you? Will, Sam? Okay, everybody unmute yourself because I want to hear you. And we'll get Kayla on in a minute. But
hello.
This is a hot news day. And so, Jamila, I want to start with you really quickly because it's a sad day for many people, particularly many women around the country. And with the Supreme Court decision that came out this morning, Stacey Brown has actually covered that for us. But can you just weigh in on tell us what the decision was?
In a nutshell, for the first time in memory, the Supreme Court eliminated a constitutional right enjoyed by American people. 6-3 decision, Roe v. Wade is overturned. This means that federally, there's no national protection for women who want to access abortion health care. It's left up to each individual state, which is why there are a lot of people going, well, I live in a place where it's not an issue, and a lot of other people are grieving going, it's all but banned where I live.
Thank you. And I'm going to bring Kayla in really quick. Not that this is supposed to be a women's conversation, but it does have that's the decision that women now don't have the right to choose what they want to do with their own bodies. And so, I mean, and Kayla, I don't want to get into an age, but as a younger woman, I'm wanting to know, how you feel. You've been sort of emotional about that today. You can take yourself off mute because we'd like to hear a little bit from you.
Yeah, I can say that me and a lot of my friends have been sort of in shock this morning. I'm just getting a lot of messages of people in my circles saying, basically just, I feel numb. I don't know what to do. This feels like it could greatly change the trajectory of my life if something unexpected were to happen to me. And I've also been thinking a lot about what this ruling means about our democracy, especially as somebody who lives in DC. So right now, kind of like what Jamila was saying, I live somewhere where the reproductive rights are pretty solid here in DC. But because DC doesn't have statehood, there's really no guarantee that will always be true. And we're heading into a year where where Congress may shift. And I'm really just nervous about what that could mean for reproductive rights where I live.
Indeed.
Yeah, Jamila, did you want to jump back in?
Just very quickly, thank you for bringing up the statehood issue. There was one time in the history of this nation that an elected congressional representative was told, you cannot speak on this issue that exclusively affects your constituency. That was Eleanor Holmes Norton talking about the federally imposed 20-week abortion ban that didn't happen. But, at the time, Representative Darrell Issa of California was instrumental in saying, no, you can't speak. We're deciding for you. And that is only because DC is not considered a state. It's not a state. It's legally not a state. We know we should be, but taxation without representation is real.
Will, have you heard any reaction from where you are out there in Prince George's County? I don't know if anybody's, and you might want to take yourself off of mute as well. But if there are folks out there that are, on social media or any elected officials or what's going on, you got a big candidates race coming up in a couple of weeks, and I don't know if any of the candidates have weighed in.
There have been probably 24 statements from county, state, federal officials who have all weighed in on it. And even if you, like myself and Sam, we're men, but we have women in our lives. I have a daughter. This touches everyone. Point blank, period. It just does. And there's a lot of statements that are saying that. I got word, and I'm waiting to get confirmation. There could be a couple of rallies going on locally. I'm waiting to get confirmation of that, and I'm going to see if I can go to one of them, which is not surprising. You know, DC is a home of rallies. It's the nation's capital.
Yeah,
That's not surprising.
Our iconic photographer Roy Lewis is out there in front of Supreme Court right now, and so we'll be posting some of his photos to WashingtonInformer.com. Sam, is there anything that you want to weigh in on this? Because I also want to talk about the big news in DC, which is the mayoral and the council election on Tuesday. No real surprises there, but maybe you think there were some surprises on Tuesday. Sam?
Briefly on the abortion issue. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Briefly on the abortion issue, looking at it in context, we can see a reaction to progressiveness that has taken place over the last few decades. And if you look at it with what happened with Roe v. Wade, and now with Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas talking about looking at Loving and other landmark decisions, we can see the beginning of the end, you know, for a lot that has really taken place in this country. That's my 2 cents on what happened with Roe v. Wade. And as far as the mayoral race, from what I've been hearing and speaking with constituents over the last few months, what happened on Tuesday was not really a surprise. I think in terms of the mayoral race, what really solidified it for Mayor Bowser, and please understand that, you know, her win was not necessarily decisive. You know, she got about 50%, but if you added what council members Trayon White and Robert White accumulated combined, they got, if not close, then more than her. So at the point when both Whites jumped into the race, there was already discussion about them splitting the anti-Bowser vote, you know, but at the very same time, Bowser is a professional campaigner, and you know, from ANC on up, she has never lost a race. She's very clear and articulate about what she has done and what she hopes to do in her position. So what happened on Tuesday was not a surprise. Now, one thing that people might want to look at is what's happening on the council side. The council is a bit more progressive, quote unquote, depending on who you talk to, with Zachary Parker taking Ward 5, and Ward 3 getting more progressive as well. There is potential for, you know, the continuation of a tug of war between the council and Phil Mendelson, and more importantly, the council and Mayor Bowser. So that's definitely a lot to look into. But, you know, even though we saw what happened on Tuesday, it was not really decisive. I think one factor was the low voter turnout. We had about 18%, and we even still had mail-in ballots to still count. So why call the race at that point? I'm not entirely sure, but there are still ballots to count, and even with it still being finished or almost finished, the results are staying the same.
I want to read briefly. Councilmember White, of course, congratulated Trayon White, congratulated Mayor Bowser, but he said he in a I guess this was a tweet. He said we have to wake up in the city because we are asleep. 19% came out and 81% of the people stayed home. This is not the end. I guess the end for him is not the end for him, as he's saying, but he's still very dismayed about the voter turnout. And I think what we're seeing in the Supreme Court, I mean, still in those decisions, and what Kayla and Jamila talked about, is that, you know, about people not understanding the power of their vote. I want you all to talk about that a little bit. This is the consequence of these low voter turnouts that we've been experiencing, not here in the District of Columbia. Well, you got a race coming up there in Prince George's, as I said before. It's a primary race, but people are not engaged. Jamila, you want to talk about that, or Will, or Kayla? Anybody want to jump in and talk about the impact of voter apathy?
Former Attorney General Eric Holder spoke a few weeks back on Washington Post Live with Jonathan Capehart. He said, this country is a political apartheid state. It is where these gerrymandered places around the country get these right-wing Republican conservatives in, and they are so completely safe statistically that they cannot be voted out, even if they vote completely contrary to their constituents' wishes. You don't have to gerrymander if you make it such that people don't think they need to show up to the poll. We see very clearly in DC, we see very clearly in PG County and the races happening all over the country. Indeed, it's about who turns out and who shows up to vote. That's gonna give you what you have.
What do you think is going to happen out there in the county, Will? You got the primary coming up, I think, is it July 17th?
July 19th.
July 19th. Right. You got how many people in this governor's race? Quite a few.
You have in the governor's race about 16. 9 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and you have 3 who are unaffiliated that will run in the November general election. But I want to touch on something Jamila kind of pointed out. You can look at messaging also as a factor. The Democrats, just speaking of Maryland, they are very pleased that 9 people are now it's 9 because Rashawn Baker stepped out of the race June 10th. That 9 people are they're saying it's showing their diversity. The Republicans, even if the mainstream or most folks will hear their messaging and say they don't know what in the heck of beans they're talking about, but they stick together and they will vote no matter what. There's your 2 differences. And you have, and what Sam has mentioned, you have a lot of vote splitting. I had one high-ranking Maryland Democrat, I don't want to say who it is, but I can say it was a gentleman. When the first of the members of those who were going to run for the Democratic Party coming out, and you had 3 blacks, he told me right in my ear, there's going to be some vote splitting. And you see it. DC was just an example of vote splitting.
Interesting. Interesting. So, I want to, but you have, again, with the governor's race, I still want to talk a little bit about that, Will, because the commercials have been like, I think there are more commercials on television right now that with the DC race over, it's not as competitive, but when you had DC, Maryland, and that's all you saw. That consumed the TV time. But who would you predict at this point will end up being winning the governor primary in Maryland?
Well, as my wife has said, you're horrible at predictions. So let me summarize it this way. The Baltimore Sun and the University of Baltimore did the first independent poll, actually, was released earlier this month. And it showed Peter Franchot ahead with about 20% of likely Democratic voters to support him. Westmore was second, and then Tom Perez was in third place with 12%. However, with the exception of his opponents in their campaign, Westmore has plenty of momentum. And he said it when we covered when several high-ranking Prince George's officials, state and local officials, came out and will back him, who was supporting Rashawn Baker. He is jumping hard. And you may wonder, well, why Prince George's County? Well, Prince George's County has the highest percentage of Democrats in Maryland. You go after where the vote is. He has a lot of momentum. Now, you want to talk about endorsements? Well, that can go all over the place. Think about it. Washington Post endorsed Tom Perez. Mm-hmm. He's known as a labor guy. But it's going to be very interesting to see. Now, on the Republican side, you have Kelly Schultz. She ranked in that University of Baltimore poll about 5 percentage points ahead of Delegate Dan Cox. He is supported and was endorsed as far as last year by Donald Trump. She's only ahead by 5 percentage points. That's that's not a whole lot, quite frankly.
Right, right. Well, I know, one of the things that we've been talking about with this election, or what some of the key issues are, these candidates are going to be addressing moving forward, and some of the things that we'll be looking at as reporters that impact our community. I wanted Kayla really to tell us, we're so happy to have her with us because she comes from Report for America. And I wanted you to, Kayla, just give a little bit of your background and what Report for America is all about, so that when folks see your name, they'll say, oh, that's Report for America.
Sure. Well, I'm really excited to be here. And basically, Report for America, it's a pretty new organization. It's an organization that works to support local media by placing young journalists in local newsrooms that otherwise might have trouble hiring someone new. So the organization helps to find qualified journalists and partner them with newsrooms and helps pay your salary, so that more newsrooms can add beats that otherwise wouldn't be covered. I'm really excited to be writing about the environment for the Informer.
Right, that's what I was going to ask you about, environment, because I know you've already started doing a couple of stories that are environment related. And we thought we wanted to have someone to cover the environment because people don't always, African Americans don't always see their connection between, this whole environmental movement. We don't see ourselves in it. But you seem to have real passion for that, to make sure that those stories are told, which is why we selected you to be with us to make, to get those stories told. And you actually had a chance to attend the 25th anniversary of DC Water. And I want to talk a little bit about that because it raised a question for you that I think is going to be one of those issues we'll be looking at going down the road. You want to share that?
Yeah. So at this event, there were all these people, and it was like a really great 25th anniversary celebration. And one of the things that DC Water repeated over and over again was that they are a world-class water authority. And at the same time, when I was talking to people in the community, people were saying, oh, I don't drink tap water. What? And I was thinking, how can both of those things be true at the same time? And what does that really mean? Is there a problem with the water, or is there a problem with the communication? And this is a question I really am looking forward to diving deeper into. What I've found so far, just in like some sort of basic reading, is that DC tap water is for the most part safe according to EPA standards, but putting a filter either on your faucet or using a pitcher-based filter is recommended. And even if the water itself is safe, if your pipes are older and made of lead, you can still sometimes have issues with leaching. But DC does treat the water in ways that mostly prevent that. That's the very basic of what I've found so far.
Well, I've written about water. I have an issue myself, and I'm just trying to figure out, it's water supply. I think that's also an issue that I'm concerned about. And we've had situations where people couldn't, because of storms or what have you, there was no water that was accessible. And buying water, it's like gas. It's like baby formula. Sometimes all of a sudden you don't have access to it, and you don't understand why. So I'm glad you're going to follow that. But also for the rest of you, as it relates to, this election moving forward, Supreme Court decisions, is there something you want to share with us that, raises a red flag for you? Speaking of red flags, we talked about gun laws, all of that. Had a Supreme Court decision yesterday on impacting Miranda rights. Jamila left. So Will, Sam, what about you?
I'll jump in very quickly. I don't know if Sam or anyone got a little nugget on their phone. President Biden said he gave an update and voiced his view on it. He simply said, quote, "This is not over." That's what you're going to see in a lot of elections. I know in Maryland, it's going to be a topic, as I mentioned earlier, about possibly a couple of rallies that's going to be planned immediately. This is not over. And this is going to be a nugget in the fall, for sure.
Sam?
I have 2 cents, and I'm going to tie in the reasoning we did earlier about voter turnout and about how that affects the people brought into office, that affect gerrymandering and Supreme Court appointments. In the United States, in particular, with the Democratic Party, now the Republican Party on one side, because they're very conservative, the people who are affiliated with that party, they're all pretty much homogenous. But the Democratic Party has a wide variety of interests. And I know in DC in particular, you have people who are affiliated with the Democratic Party, but don't have democratic values. I'm saying this because the Democrats, with everything that has been going on over the last 15, 20 years or so, they have been very indecisive in some respects as it relates to pushing the ball forward and negating what the Republicans are doing. And it has created an atmosphere where the Republicans are able to pretty much do what it is that they want to do in dialing back a lot of the issues that we have progressed on as a nation. So going into the midterm elections, going into November, I think it's incumbent, not even I, but just in speaking with people, who feel betrayed by the Democratic Party, who feel like they're being marginalized by the Democratic Party, it is incumbent upon Democrats to listen to them, because every day there are challengers coming up testing incumbents, such as what happened in South Carolina with Marcel Dixon and Jim Clyburn. There are people coming up to test these incumbents because the incumbents are sitting in office for such a long time. And as they sit in office, they become more moderate and more conservative because their end goal is to keep office and not go with the times and represent the people for who they truly are. So until the people in power address that issue, you will continue seeing apathy among voters. All of that is very well connected. So I think that's a message that politicians need to take home from the White House on down.
Well, Jamila, I wanted to just kind of wrap this up a little bit and bring up another topic we haven't talked about, which is the January 6th hearing. And when Sam talks about politicians and we take a look at the congressman who is leading, the two actually that are leading these hearings, Congressman Benny Thompson and Congresswoman Liz Cheney, right? I mean, who have really, folks believe they've done a really tremendous job in laying out, one, what Trump appears to have been responsible for this insurrection. And also, Sam talks about the Republicans staying together, but the point, why are they sticking together behind an issue that is now, we're seeing more and more that there was some culpability with many in the White House as it relates to this insurrection. Can you just give us maybe your feeling on how these hearings are going, the role of Congressman Benny Thompson, and where you think this is going to end up?
These hearings are about American democracy, period, full stop. Either you agree with the rule of law and that no one is above it, or you believe in some kind of oligarchy where might makes right. There is no in between. These hearings are demonstrating, illustrating, and in full color on display with the video, that this was a concerted effort to stop the legitimate, fair, and already done transfer of power from the 45th president to Joe Biden. And the fact that the 45th president had so much in terms of, I'm trying to be factual and not use my conjecture. This was terrifying. This was frightening. But he went into this knowing that what he was doing was illegal, was not going to stand, and he gathered his sycophants around him who would do his bidding, even though they shouldn't have. The greater risk here is what happens if all of this comes out and nothing happens, if there is no culpability for trying to dismantle American political systems and democracy. If people see that there are some who are above the law, I refer people back to Orwell. Whether it's animals or people just deciding, well, I'll just be an individual and run around and do what I want. This is frightening. This is very frightening, and it didn't have to be so.
Yeah, I'm gonna close out, but Kayla, any you want to jump in and say about just what this all means?
Yeah,
Kayla?
I do think that it all does come back to democracy. A lot of the threads of our conversation do. So on one hand, you have the January 6th hearings where you're seeing that a group of people were trying to subvert the will of the people. And then you have the Supreme Court ruling and have the majority of the Supreme Court was appointed by presidents who did not win the popular vote. You have really low voter turnout at the local level where voting really, really makes a difference. And I just think that all of that just goes to show people really need to get involved in their democracy at the level where it matters, so that if we build power at the city and state levels, we can eventually fix our federal democracy so that it reflects the will of the people.
All right, Sam Ford. Sam or Will. I don't think Sam Ford's with us today.
Not the first time I've done that. I think that we have a lot to think about as voters in DC about what it is that we want, and I think that DC politicians, the Board of Elections, whoever, we need to do a revamp of civic engagement and political education. Really understanding voting in context, so that people can really get an idea of what their vote means and what civic engagement entails beyond just voting and being informed. I think that'll really, it wouldn't solve apathy in a sense, but it goes a long way in clearing up misconceptions.
Will, you got the last word.
Hard for me to combat what everyone else said, though. I agree with Sam's point. You do have voter apathy, and I don't even know if it's increased because of COVID-19 when everyone was in the house. It really was already there. You have candidates who they come out, they say, I'm all for the people. I'm all for them. I want to help. I don't think there's any doubt by that. But you also got to think on the other side, power comes with that. I learned reading what Sam and James have written about the council chair in DC. Wow, council chair got a decent amount of power running the meetings and the agenda. You set an agenda, you're setting what can be done. Point blank, period. And and being the governor in Maryland, Democrat hasn't even had the seat for 8 years. What does that tell you? You got, Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1. And just a final little nugget that Sam also mentioned. Sam he been on point today, always on point. But when he mentioned about some folks who are Democrats, and I think, Denise, you and I touched on this. In Prince George's County, a lot of churches all around, lots and lots. It doesn't have to be Baptist. It doesn't have to be Presbyterian. There is a social conservative nugget in churches. And if you think it's a lot of liberalism going on in churches, listen to some of the main pastors who have come out and said, I'm not marrying no one of the same sex. My Bible tells me that's not the case. What have the times said today? Leave that question there.
Wow, you just opened up another can of worms there, Will. And that could have taken us into another conversation. But I think that really goes to show what we have, why we as journalists really need to pay attention to what's going on in these legislatures. Clearly, just going out to vote is not the answer. Stand engaged in following what those issues are and how people vote on those issues. And sometimes candidates, I'll say that maybe for a candidate like Trayon White, who might need a little help sometimes in getting his agenda forward. Candidates can be left out there on their own if they've got an agenda that the people want. And I think that's what you all are talking about. And our power is being eroded. And that's what the Supreme Court decisions over the last couple of days are showing us. So with that, we've gone over. We might have to start extending this last Friday show to about an hour and a half, and just give us all a half an hour to do our thing. But I want to thank all of you all for being with us. I want those who are watching to make sure that you follow Will Ford, Sam Collins, Jamila Bay, and Kayla Benjamin. They're all on social media. Follow their stories. Follow us here at the Washington Informer. Submit your questions. If there's something you want them to follow up on, that's what they're here to do. So again, thank you all for being with us, and thank everybody. I think we're done right now, Shevry. So have a great weekend. Be safe, and I might see you out there in front of the Supreme Court. I don't know. All right. Talk to you.